Excellent. Okay, well, welcome everyone to day two of our meeting with well, actually, it's day three actually, since we started on Monday. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. We have a full agenda today, and unlike yesterday, well, I'll just speak real quickly to yesterday. I know that you all know that I'm a kind of a stickler to um, agenda and time, and I realize how important time is for all of you. Um, Things got a little bit not out of control, but we just kind of we went a little bit over yesterday, a few hours over. I do not expect that to be the case today. I'm going to try to stick to the time that we have set for each of our agenda items. We'll take a few small breaks and a lunch break throughout the day, but I appreciate all of your patience. I appreciate your patience yesterday in working with the commission. I think every time we are working with the commission, there's just so many people that have comments and things that they want to say regarding the issues that um, we tend to kind of go over our allotted time. So, but I do appreciate all of your um, everybody's participation yesterday and your patience as we worked through it. I think we got done. We really did a really good job yesterday. In finalizing the Bluefish Amendment and then working through some direction for the Recreational Reform Initiative. I was very happy with the council and the board's participation in that process. And I thought we did a really good job, even though it went a little late. Um, we got some really good work done, and I expect that we're going to get a lot of good work done today as well. We're going to start this morning with a presentation on Atlantic Surfclam and Ocean Quahog 2022 specifications review. We have Jessica Coakley, who is going to provide us with a presentation, and unless anybody has any questions at this time, Peter Defer, I see your hand up. Do you have something you want to offer before we get started?
Yes, I do, very quickly, Mr. Chairman, because I don't
Yeah,
want to
go
slow
ahead.
down. I don't want to slow. Thank you very much. But if we wind up with some measurable extra time, I for one, and I think Dr. Rago expressed this in his email, did not have enough chance to properly give consideration to our rec reform. So if we wind up with a half an hour of available time, I would really, really, really like to spend that on discussion of rec reform. Thank you.
So where do you think that would fit in, Peter,
Well,
with our agenda at the end
if
of the day?
yeah, either in the middle of the afternoon. I mean, it's possible that we wind up with a little bit of extra time, taking early lunch, and then we have a half an hour before we start in the afternoon, or something like that. Maybe at the end of the afternoon, the last item, if we wind up, only if we wind up ahead of schedule.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
Just wanted to
I
raise
just
it as
want
a
to make sure that
possibility.
it's clear that if we want to have a little bit of a discussion about rec reform, as long as there's no action
No,
taken, because it wasn't noticed that way.
no
Um,
Q&A.
I'm certainly,
Okay,
and
thank you.
and even if we don't do it today, it could come up under other business on Thursday. Um,
Okay, thank you.
that's another way to do it. So I'll give some thought to it. Adam Nowalski, I see your hand raised. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm certainly all in favor of any opportunity for ongoing discussion, but giving the commission's involvement, some notice to them that we might discuss it some more in case somebody wants to listen in might be appropriate as well if you're looking for a place. Again, as you mentioned, under other business, when again, we could at least give them a day's notice or something that we might be talking about it. Again, I'm all in favor of having discussion. I certainly support it. I am just a little concerned about having discussion without the commission knowing we're planning to do so.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I that is one of my concerns is that we have ongoing discussion without the commission involvement with the policy board. I almost feel like it's it's going around the process that we have in place. But let's just see how the day falls out, and maybe, as Adam mentioned, maybe we can notice, we can send a notice to commissioners on the policy board that maybe we bring this up under other business tomorrow, and see how things go. So I'll talk with leadership. I'll talk with Chris and Wes during a break, and we'll try to figure something out. But I appreciate it, Peter, and thanks for your comments, Adam. Eric Reed, your hand's up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tomorrow we're going to have a discussion about the Commission's action on black sea bass. It might be a good time to do that because you might get participation from the Commission at that time. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, true. We would have the policy board with us. Is that that is the policy board, the remand on black sea bass commercial state allocation. So, okay, well, it's something to consider. I appreciate you guys bringing that up to me. I wasn't planning to have an additional discussion, but if that's an interest of the council, then we'll just have to try to figure something out. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll make it work at some point. Mike Penny, I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to note that if in the chance that we do have an opportunity to discuss further, either later today or tomorrow or something, if people have specific questions, if they want to email me their questions, that way I can try to be prepared to respond quickly and hopefully succinctly to their questions. And then if we don't get a chance to have the discussion before we conclude our meeting tomorrow, I can start to work on an email response to some of those questions and share that out. So I just offer that up for people to think about.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. Okay. So with those questions and comments on rec reform as a follow-up from yesterday, we'll try to handle it the best we can. But I do want to go to, I do want to turn now to our agenda for this morning. We're already 15 minutes into our agenda item, and Jessica Coakley is going to be providing us a presentation on the Atlantic Surfclam and Ocean Quahog 2022 specifications review. So Jess, whenever you're ready, you go ahead and get started, and we'll do questions and answers. And it looks like there's no action needed at this point from the council, but I'm sure there'll be questions from members that we can address. So whenever you're ready, Jess.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear. Sound
All
good.
right. Excellent. So as Mike noted, why are my slides not advancing? Oh, there we go. So as Mike noted, today you'll be reviewing 2022 measures for surf clams and ocean quahog. We received a commercial fishery data update this year, which we've incorporated into the fishery information document that I'll be reviewing. So I'll start first with surf clams, review the fishery information document, review the fishery performance report for these species, which is actually a combined performance report that the advisory panel developed. I'll review the staff recommendations for surf clam for 2022. Paul Rago will review the SSC recommendations, and then we're going to repeat the same process for ocean quahog. And then finally, I have some other updates that I'll be providing on other clam-related issues at the end of my presentation. So in 2020, the council received a level 3 management track assessment that included data through 2019 for surf clams. It indicated that the surf clam stock is not overfished and it's above the target biomass levels. That management track assessment also indicated that the fishing mortality was below the threshold level, so overfishing is not occurring in this fishery based on 2019 data. Based on the updated fishery information we received this year, which included landings through 2020, we've updated our landings by area. So the blue is starting from left to right. Southern Virginia is in purple, Delmarva is in blue. New Jersey is in teal, Long Island is in green, Southern New England is in yellow, Georges Bank is in black, and then there's some other landings, including state landings, that are noted there, but that comprise a very small component of this fishery. So as you can see, the landings in those southern areas have declined over time, with more landings occurring in the more northern areas, and there has been a decline in landings in about the recent decade. The information document also breaks out Surfclam landings by 10-minute square. So the panel on the top are landings in the 1980s, and the panel on the bottom is the most recent decade, broken out into two parts. And so this just spatially shows that shift that we saw in the figure above. So fewer landings occurring in those southern areas and more of the landings occurring in those more northern areas for this fishery. This is landings per unit effort by area. So as landings increase, and this is again an annual estimate. So overall annually landings per unit effort. So you can see spikes in those southern areas in the early 80s and 90s, with LPUE since declining, and bigger spikes in more recent years in that southern New England, Georges Bank area as the effort has shifted there. The black line is the total landings per unit effort over time across all areas. And for this fishery, you see a steady decline in LPUE over time. In 2020, there were 43 vessels that participated in the Surfclam fishery. So they either landed Surfclam only, or fished for both Surfclam and Ocean Quahog. That's the same number of vessels as in 2019. There were 7 processors that processed both Surfclams and/or Ocean Quahog in 3 states. There was a decrease in the overall ex-vessel value in 2020. It was $23 million. It was down $5 million from 2019. I pulled the most recent quota monitoring reports from the GARFO website. This is Surfclam landings through June 2nd, 2021. So the red bar across the top is the quota, 3.4 million bushels. If the quota was taken at an exactly equal rate throughout the fishing year, that's what it would look like on that green line. The landings in 2020 are given in the yellow line, and the current year 2020 is the blue line on this graphic, which shows that the landings in 2021 are pretty much on pace with what was landed in 2020. Now, we've developed a fishery performance report with our advisors. It covers both Surfclams and Ocean Quahogs. The advisors met on April 22nd, and that was prior to the SSC meeting in May. They were asked a standard series of trigger questions that we ask all our advisory panels when they develop these performance reports. That report is behind the meeting tab, so I'm sure you've taken a look at it already, but our advisors identified several critical issues, so I'm going to highlight those here for you in my presentation. I'd also like to note that the advisors have indicated that they like to see status quo quotas because that quota stability translates into stability in the fishery and in the markets. So probably not a big surprise that COVID-19 is a big issue for the fishery. Our advisors noted that sales to restaurants and retail has been low. The processors have been continuing to operate, but this means that their inventories have been rising, and they've had increased storage costs and expenses that they've had to deal with because of that. They did note, however, this year that distribution is starting to increase in anticipation of improved sales, so that their dealers and buyers are starting to purchase, like this may be a much more normal summer, but at this point, it hasn't really helped the bottom line for them. And they do expect these effects are going to be ongoing and longer lasting. The advisors also wanted to highlight the importance of research, particularly supporting research in the Great South Channel habitat management area. Now that is an area, a habitat management area that was put into place by the New England Fishery Management Council, and it's in the Nantucket Shoals, southern New England area. The advisors recommended that both the New England Council and Mid-Atlantic Council pursue a cross-council workshop. They had a lot of questions about what's going on with the management in that area, and they thought it would be worthwhile to pull both councils and interested parties together for a workshop to review the management process, to help better understand what research is being conducted in that area, to describe the process for ongoing management in that area, and essentially develop an understanding of what this means for the process of managing these clam access areas. And they really highlighted, particularly with climate change and shifting distributions, that it was important to understand how management in that area could potentially be dynamic. The advisors also have concerns about access to fishing grounds. They noted that the development of these wind energy, aquaculture areas, marine areas, historic monuments, and all these other offshore uses are really a critical issue in terms of access. And they feel that they have the potential to reduce safe access to fishing grounds, and ultimately it's going to result in greater concentration of fishing effort into smaller and smaller areas. So they wanted to highlight that for you as well. And lastly, they noted that the Surfclam and Ocean Quahog Advisory Panel would like to request that AP members have 2 seats on all fishery management action teams for issues related to these fisheries. Right now, we have an FMAP for the species separation requirements that are occurring in these fisheries. However, they noted that their request doesn't just apply to that FMAP. They'd like to see 2 seats on all FMAPs. So just a little bit of history in terms of the specifications. Back in 2020, the SSC met and developed recommendations for 2021 to 2026 overfishing limits and acceptable biological catches. Their recommendations were based on an SSC modified overfishing limit probability distribution with a CV, coefficient of variation, of 100%. And that was based on that report for the level 3 management track assessment that was received. And in 2021, that would have applied a P-star of 0.47 based on the council's tolerance for risk of overfishing. So the SSC, using that information, specified the overfishing limit, accounting for scientific uncertainty and developed recommendations for acceptable biological catch. And then the council met and followed on to recommend annual catch limits and an annual catch target for this fishery. So for 2021 to 2026, this table shows the recommendations of both the SSC and the council that were passed on to the National Marine Fisheries Service and that were ultimately approved and implemented. The final rule, I think, came out about a month ago. You should have seen that. And it implemented commercial quotas that are the same ones that have been in place since the early 2000s. So here are all the values that you recommended then and that are now in place. So after reviewing all of this information, the staff recommended that there be no changes to the measures for 2022. If the council would like to maintain these same measures, there is one thing that is required annually, and that is the council needs to pass on a recommendation to the regional administrator to suspend the minimum size. And as you'll note in the staff memo, based on that information, we did not trigger that 30% threshold where there are more small clams than that value that would require the RA to implement a minimum size. So that is an action that would be required to be taken today to maintain the status quo. And I just put all our pictures up because, you know, you haven't seen staff in a while. So just to remind you all what we look like. Hopefully we will all see you in person very soon. So with that, all that information was passed on to the Scientific and Statistical Committee, and Dr. Paul Rago will give the report out on that.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica. I'm assuming everybody can hear me.
Yes,
anyhow,
I can hear you.
We can hear you.
okay, thank you. Yeah. I just to echo, we basically agreed with the staff recommendation and did not recommend any changes to the ABCs for 2022. We noted that we did have some concerns and so forth, and among them were the fact that there was no survey conducted in 2020, but that really only has minor consequences for future assessments. Within the stock assessment, there's a consistent pattern, as Jessica demonstrated, where the decline in CPUE occurs typically over a period of years as a particular 10-minute square is reduced. And usually this has been described in terms of an economic threshold in that catching, processing and harvesting occurs within 10-minute squares until they reach some economic threshold that provides an incentive to move to another area. So that general process has been occurring for some time, and SSE noted that this apparent conversion of high fishing success areas into average density areas, and cited the economic explanation that usually underlies that. We really don't know what those serial reductions mean for future recruitment. The SSC also echoed the concerns of the advisory panel, and that wind energy development is going to reduce access to traditional fishing areas and has the effect and an unknown effect of concentrating effort elsewhere. Again, we reiterated concerns previously expressed about the sensitivity of surf clams to longer term climate change. But despite all of these concerns, there really wasn't any compelling evidence to modify or recommend changes to the ABCs for 2020. So that, I think, is in a nutshell our summary of the surf clam discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Oh, and that's everything for surf clams right now. I saw Mike Luisi's audio was disconnected. Mike, are you back on?
Yeah, I'm back. I don't know what happened.
Okay,
I lost you for a minute, and I just rebooted the webinar, and I'm fine now. Thanks.
Okay, good. Would you like to take questions on surf clam right now, or I can continue with my presentation on Quahog and we can pause there?
Well, why don't we take some questions now? If you're okay with that, we can do questions on surf clams at this point. And let me get my screen open here.
I see Peter Deferred's hand is up.
Yeah, Peter Deferred's hands up. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jessica and Dr. Rago. Jessica, can you put back up the slide that shows the LPUE long-term? Because that's a question that I have for, here we go. So Dr. Rago, one of your SSC members and I have had this discussion for at least 10 years or so about the decline from since before 1990, the long-term slide with only that blip around the year 2000. And of course, there are a couple of different reasons, as you guys have discussed. And you seem to indicate that it was unclear about why we've got this long-term decline, because it could be just that the clams are spreading out. We do know that, as per Jim Weinberg's publication of 2009, that the population has shifted north, and this graph indicates that as well. That back in the 70s, that it was that landings were in Virginia, and now they're not. And we know that the population is distributed north, but do we have a sense of whether or not the population is simply less dense? Is it spreading out, or is there something else going on? And then the other question that I had is whether or not there are any areas in the distribution where we know that there might be a spawning aggregation because it's not practical to fish for the clams, to dredge for them. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think obviously there's a lot of things going on within this graph. As you noted, there has been some habitat degradation or loss of habitat in the south, which resulted in the absence of fishing in those areas, and as you noted, reductions in overall density. Whether that same principle applies to all of the trends by area is not entirely known. The changes in processing capacity and location of that capacity does have some influence on some of those graphs as well. So there is a strong underlying set of economic factors that have some influence on these overall trends. Now, that doesn't dismiss the importance of the reductions that occur within high productivity areas. Your second question is related to whether or not there is any consequence of those reductions for spawning, and whether we know of any spawning aggregations within the stock. We did discuss that with Dan Hennon at he's the lead assessment scientist for the center on this, and we did, and he noted at that time that the resolution of the survey is really insufficient to identify such factors, and if there are such aggregations, it will require relatively fine scale analyses to fully understand whether or not things like the Ali effect, which is basically the proximity of clams to each other, which affects fertilization success and so forth. So those factors are not entirely known for surf clams or ocean quahogs for that matter. But I think the SSC shares the concern associated with the trends in overall LPUE, but the consequences for the future of the stock and the assessment of the stock are not entirely known at this time. So thank you.
Thank you. Quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully that's it.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter. Yeah, please go ahead, follow up.
Jessica, you gave us information on the distribution of landings, but my understanding is that most of the harvest is coming further north than the landings indicated, and a lot of the catch is from up north, and a lot of it out of Great South Channel. Is that right? So this is landings, correct?
Yes, Peter. So this is landings for the fishery.
Yeah, but my understanding from talking to a couple of different people is a lot of the activity about the clam dredging is even further north than this.
Well, the southern New England area, that yellow area, would capture the Nantucket Shoal,
right?
Area occurring in the fishery, and then George's Bank is given in black. So you can see, I mean, right now it looks like about a third of the landings are coming from those areas, with a pretty good chunk coming from New Jersey, offshore of New Jersey right now. And that's where I know the industry has a lot of concerns about some of the wind areas being proposed in those New Jersey areas, like the Hudson Pizza Slice. And
okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thanks, Peter. Jess, I have a couple quick questions for you. Just to clarify and make sure that I understand. So you showed a graph where the landings were kind of on track with what the landings were for last year, but the quota was, yeah, there you go. You know, the quota is much higher than what the landings are. Is that just a market? Is that market demand? Is that what that is, or is it a resource issue?
So the industry have indicated to us that it's market demand, that a lot of and most of the clams are sold through contracts to large companies.
Yeah,
You know, like a Progresso or a Campbell's or some of those groups for products and ingredients. So they've indicated to us that that's a market issue. I also know, I guess maybe it was last year, one of the members of the industry had talked about sort of the opening up of some of the EU markets because they previously had some restrictions in terms of imports on that. But in this graph itself, you know, that yellow line is 2020. So those landings because of COVID were already down a little bit.
right.
And so the 2021 is on track with what is already a slightly lower level. Prior to that, the fishery was landing maybe 60% of the quota that's allocated in the Surfclam or ocean quahog fishery as a ballpark.
Okay. Okay, that's good. That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify for the record. I also had a question about, you mentioned a workshop being considered. I jotted that note down. I don't.
Yes. So it was noted by industry. They wanted to, let me find the slide here so I can pull that up. Because of a lot of the industry concerns in that Nantucket Shoals, the Great South Channel Habitat Management Area, they were recommending, they wanted to see more Mid-Atlantic Council involvement, and they also had a lot of questions about the New England process. So this was sort of a request to our council and New England to consider a sort of a cross-council workshop to engage the players in the industry to talk through those 4 items that the advisors highlighted.
Okay. Yeah, I checked with Chris, and we don't have something like that on our work plan for this year, but would this be something that would it be driven by New England, or would we be expected to, if we decide to do a workshop, is that something that's going to fall in our lap?
Well, I guess that's a question for the leadership for New England and Mid-Atlantic. That habitat management area and, you know, the research that's been going on in there and the active management of it has been through New England, because they've been working through that through their habitat management authorities. So they've been sort of the driver of that habitat management area. So I would think they'd obviously play a big role if that's something the council wants to pursue. But it would be a conversation I think you and Chris and Tom Neese and Eric Reed probably have to have.
Yeah, okay. No, I appreciate that. I see Chris Moore's hand just came up. Chris, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, Jessica just made my point. I'll follow up with Tom and certainly have the conversation. But as you pointed out, we don't have this on our schedule for 2021, obviously, but it could be something we think about for 2022.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and I appreciate that, Jess. So, okay, let's go. We had a couple more questions, comments, and then we can go into Ocean Quahog. I've got Dan Farnham and Michelle Duvall. So Dan, you're first, and then Michelle will be next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Yep, very good, thanks. I have a quick question. I think it's for Dr. Rago. He had mentioned that there's no changes to the ABCs for 22, although there were some concerns. One concern was as the windmill farms are being developed, they're going to reduce access to the fishing grounds. As of right now, there's only 5 windmills developed, in the south of Block Island. As the major windmill farm south of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard is built out, do you anticipate that to be a reason to reduce the ABCs for this particular fishery?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think it would be, something that would have to be evaluated within the assessment context as to whether that was the appropriate measure or not. Although it will preclude fishing or could preclude fishing in desirable areas, it may not have the further consequence of requiring a reduction in the ABC, simply because, as Jessica's graph has shown, the ABC is not limiting with respect to current removals, that they remain consistently below the ABC across years.
Okay, very good. Yep, thank you
Thanks.
for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Dan, for your question. Thanks, Paul. I'm going to go next to Michelle Duvall, and then I'll turn it back to Jess so she can finish her presentation. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a quick one. I'm not sure if it's for Jessica or Dr. Rago, but I just was, I had noticed in the SSC report that Surfclam and Ocean Quahog are surveyed by the commercial vessels, every 6 years. And I was just curious when the next survey is.
Hi, Michelle.
Okay, sorry. Please go ahead.
So the next survey is scheduled to be conducted this August. And I'm actually going to touch on the survey schedule a little bit in my later in my presentation.
Awesome, thanks.
Great.
All right, thanks, Jess. Dan, your hand's still up. Did you have another follow-up question? Okay, it just went down. Okay, so thanks for the question and answers. I think that was good. Let's go. I'm going to turn back to Jessica, and you can go ahead, Jessica, and continue with your presentation, and we'll wrap things up after you're done.
Great. So we're going to continue on with Ocean Quahog. Back in 2020, we received a level 1 management track assessment for Ocean Quahog, and that included data through 2019 that indicated that the Ocean Quahog stock was not overfished and that the median biomass was above the target level. In addition, through 2019, overfishing was not occurring in this fishery. It was below the threshold level. Similar to Surfclams, this is the landings by area, and we have seen a similar shift for Ocean Quahog into more northern, the fishery, the Ocean Quahog fishery, into more northern areas, with declines in landings in those Southern Virginia and Delmarva regions over time, and more of the fishery occurring in Long Island, Southern New England, Georges Bank, and then the main mahogany quahog fishery is also noted on this graph as well. Landings per unit effort for Ocean Quahog has remained relatively stable over time overall, as shown by that black line, although there is variability by region. The Ocean Quahog fishery, the market for it is very specific, so those landings levels have been a bit lower than the Surfclam landings over time. These figures show the 1980s above and the most recent decade below, and you can see a similar shift from less landings coming from those southern areas and then shifting over time into the more northern areas as well. So in 2000, oops, I should have changed that. It should say 2020. There were 15 non-main vessels that participated in the Ocean Quahog fishery. So this is either landing Ocean Quahog or both Ocean Quahog and Surfclams on that vessel. And there were 8 vessels that participated in the main mahogany quahog fishery. Again, 7 processors for Surfclam and Ocean Quahog operating in 3 states. There was a decrease in overall ex-vessel value in this fishery. In 2020, it was $16 million. That was down $3 million from 2019. And both for surf clams and for ocean quahogs, it was less driven by a change in price and more driven by a change in the volume of landings. That's really what's driving those changes in the overall ex-vessel value. So quahog landings through June 2nd, this is just the non-main fishery. The yellow line is 2020 and the blue line is 2021. So as of June 2nd, the ocean quahog landings are actually a little bit higher than 2020, than what we saw in 2020. And this is the main mahogany quahog fishery. They're allocated 100,000 bushels. And as of June 2nd, the landings for 2021 are a little lower than what we saw in 2020, but still substantially less than that overall allocation of 100,000 bushels. So for ocean quahog 2021 to 2026, the SSC for the OFL and ABC recommended using an SSC modified OFL probability distribution with a CV of 100%. That was based on that level 1 management track assessment. So for 2021, based on the council's risk tolerance for overfishing, you ended up with a P-star of 0.49 that was used in the calculations. So the flow chart for ocean quahog, because we have that main mahogany quahog fishery in there, it's a little bit different. So once the council sets an annual catch limit, it's actually split into two pieces. 100,000 bushels go to the main fishery, and then the remainder goes as an annual catch target to the non-main IPQ fishery. So for 2021 to 2026, these are the values that were recommended by the SSC and the council and that have been implemented by NIMS. The commercial quota that is in place in this chart is similar, well, it's pretty much the same commercial quota that's been in place since the early 2000s for this fishery. So based on all of that information, the staff recommends no changes to measures for 2022 for ocean quahog. And Dr. Rago is just going to cover the pieces of the SSC report here.
Okay,
ahead, Paul.
thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, to get to the bottom line, there were some concerns, but the SSC recommended continuation with the previously recommended ABCs. You know, there were some concerns expressed about the declining trend in the southern areas, but noted that the overall pattern of landings per unit effort is much flatter than for Atlantic surf clam, and that is also can be seen in the time series of recommended ABCs from the 2020 deliberations. As you noted there, you know, they're basically 44,000 metric tons for ABCs across all years. As always, this is a long life species, and given climate change and wind energy development, there are some concerns related to that. But the SSC noted that these concerns are not as acute as for ocean Atlantic surf clam. The George's Bank stock is very large and relatively untouched, and there does seem to be good evidence of recruitment over time. The potential of wind energy to create refugia there was some speculative discussion about this, but there really isn't any sufficient quantitative information to identify its long-term importance. So in summary, though, none of these concerns were sufficient for the SSC to recommend changes from what was previously recommended to the council. So thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Chairman, that completes my presentation for ocean cohogs. If you'd like to pause there before I get into updates, we could deal with the specifications piece, and then I can review the few slides that I have on updates on other activities, if that's appropriate.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine with me. So your recommendation is no change to 2022 specifications. And
Yes.
so unless somebody has a concern, or does anyone have any questions for Jessica or Paul regarding their presentation on specs? Is there anyone from the public, from the audience, that has any questions they want to ask? I see James Fletcher with his hand up. Go ahead, James. If you're speaking, James, we can't hear you. You might be on mute. You might want to unmute yourself.
And we worked with Fletcher a little bit before the meeting. Fletcher, if you want to just check that that microphone setting that we looked at, just to make sure that same microphone is still selected, because you look like you're unmuted from this end.
Yeah, it looks like he's unmuted, but we just can't hear him.
And then if that's not working, Fletcher, maybe try that switch audio option, and I say maybe go to that switch audio option under that caret and do maybe first just try the disconnect and then just reconnect with computer audio and see if that works.
How about now?
There you go.
There you go.
We can hear you, James. Go ahead.
Okay, question for Jessica and Dr. Rago. We're assuming that climate change is causing species to move northern. If that is true, then off of North Carolina, there should be occurring the southern quahog and the southern surfclam. If this is true, are there any regulations in the mid-Atlantic on these two southern species, or is that an open fishery?
Hi, Jim. I can answer that. So for Surfclam, the regulations are for Surfclam solidissima. So right now, the southern Surfclam is described as a subspecies, Surfclam solidissima similis, and the northern one is Surfclam solidissima solidissima. So the regulations are not specific to those subspecies. However, I'm going to talk a little bit later in my talk, give the council an update on our Surfclam genetic study that is looking into the issue of these southern species in the case of surfclams and their distribution and hybridization, different issues related to surfclam. I'm not familiar with the southern ocean quahog, unless it's a different kind of quahog species, but for surfclams, we're looking into that.
James, did you have a follow-up on that?
No, no. If she's gonna cover it later, I may have a question later, but no. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else from the public have anything they want to ask of Jessica or Dr. Rego? Okay, I don't see any other hands. Jim, if you could put your hand down, that would be helpful. So I think we're good, Jess. If you want to go ahead and proceed with your presentation.
So, Mr. Chairman, we do, if the council has no changes for 2022, they don't have to take any action for Ocean Quahog. However, the Surfclam minimum size requirement is an annual issue in the regulation. So if the council wishes to follow, the staff and SSC recommendations for Surfclam to make no changes, the council does need to make a motion to request that the regional administrator suspend the minimum size in 2022.
Okay.
And I have drafted a simple motion to that effect. If someone wants to take that up, so I can just stop sharing this and share that.
Yeah, can you share that screen with your motion? And
Yeah, I'll get that up.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman. This is Peter Defer.
Okay, thanks, Peter. And it looks like Peter Hughes is going to second that motion.
Okay, let me hold on.
Peter Defer, I'll ask you to read it into the record once it gets up on the screen.
And
trying to get it up
for the information of the other council members, particularly who've not been here for us when we've done this, is it's as Jessica said, we annually do this, and the reason is because it's not in the FMP that we can do this over a long term. We need to do it annually. That's the way it's the FMP is prepared. So I move to request that the regional administrator suspend the Atlantic Surfclam minimum size for 2022.
Okay, thanks, Peter. And Peter Hughes, his hand was up to second. Peter, did you want to second that motion?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Peter Defer, did you want to add anything else other than what you've already said?
No, I don't think so. Jessica covered the whole issue, that there's a small enough number of small clams, and they're not really, the industry doesn't want them. I mean, they try and steer clear of the smaller clams anyway.
Right. Okay. Is there any objection, Peter Defer, if you can put your hand down? We'll clear the board. Is there any objection to this motion by any member of the council? Okay, seeing no objection, are there any abstentions? Okay, we have one abstention by the National Marine Fisheries Service, so the motion passes without objection, and one abstention by National Marine Fisheries Service. Okay, thank you for that, and I think we can move on, Jess.
All right, let me just get my presentation up again. Okay. All right, just double checking, you can see my slide?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So just a couple quick updates. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Surfclam genetic study, so give you an update on that project. Talk a little bit about the Surfclam Ocean Quahog species separation requirements, the white paper we're developing and the timing for that. And then I'm going to touch on some changes in terms of the clam survey for 2021 and going forward. So just some background, we have a contract with Matt Hare at Cornell University. He is a genetics expert, and he is looking at species diagnostics and population connectivity for the Atlantic surfclam, Spiciolus solidissima solidissima, and the southern surfclam, Spiciolus solidissima similis. So there have been some preliminary studies in Massachusetts and in New York that found pockets of Spiciulus solidissima similis within our region. So he's going to be using samples to determine the range and habitat affinities for each of these species. They have very different longevity, growth rates. However, they look very similar in the field. So of a similar size, you probably would not be able to differentiate them out on a vessel or in the field. But because of the differences in growth and other things, that does have implications to the stock assessment. It has implications to our fisheries and how we manage them. So they're going to be exploring this issue. He's also going to be using high resolution genomic techniques to quantify the amount of gene flow connectivity between the species and verify whether there's any hybridization going on between them. So as with everything, COVID has had some impacts. So Matt and his analysts had requested a 1-year no-cost extension because of some of the sampling challenges that they have had. So that project initially was going to be completed in the first quarter of this year. We're going to be looking at it being completed in the first quarter of next year. To date, he's conducted 2 pilot runs with the samples from both subspecies, and they selected the genomic sequencing methods that they're going to use. So they're working with the University of Minnesota, and their labs are going to be processing those samples for them. They have 150 SS similis DNA extracts that were sent to the University of Minnesota in March, and they have 350 that are being prepped for SS solidissima that will be sent in September. They noted that they did have some initial genetic markers that were developed to do this hybridization assay, but those provided uncertain hybrid identifications. However, all these new samples going out, they expect the genomic data is going to be much higher resolution, and so that will be better for their hybridization assay when they're able to take a look at that. So I expect there's going to be more information coming on this as they get those samples processed and get all that information back and start analyzing it and compiling those final reports. So I expect in 2022, we'll be getting updates, and we anticipate to get a presentation directly from Matt Hare. So I'm also going to note, and I know Chris will note this under the planned meeting topics, that the species separation requirement white paper that we're working on is going to be discussed at the October Council meeting instead of August. There have been a lot of things going on with clams and with habitat, so we're just a little behind on that, although we've been continuing to work on it. And when you look at the planned meeting topics, you'll see August is a jam-packed schedule. This one will just be bumped to October, so we'll cover it then. As we noted to Michelle, the clam survey was not conducted in 2020 because of COVID, but it is going to go out in 2021. However, we have a very specific schedule we follow for the clam survey. Not all species in all areas are covered in every year. So in 2020, we missed the Surfclam South part of the survey. So we talked with the center. They provided us with some options for that. And ultimately, it was decided that for 2021, rather than skipping over Surfclam South, they're actually going to conduct the Surfclam South in 2021 and then continue on with the cycle of then doing Surfclam North, then Ocean Quahog South, then Ocean Quahog North, and then we bump back to 2 years of Surfclam South and Surfclam North, and it kind of rolls forward from there. So this will shift the Surfclam assessment to 2025 and the Ocean Quahog assessment to 2027, but we currently have specifications on the books that are going to cover us until 2026. So when we start approaching 2025, which seems like a long ways away, I'll start worrying about specifications and how we're going to cover that interim year and get the specifications packages written and packaged up. But we're good for a while on that. So I wanted to just highlight those changes for you and what it means for our assessment schedule. And that covers the last few updates, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Thanks for your updates. Yeah, it does seem like a long ways away, but as long as we're covered between now and then, I think we're in good shape, unless there are changes. I guess there's still going to be annual reviews, right, by the SSC to consider modifications to the quotas that are set for the next, 5-6 years.
Absolutely. So those annual reviews will continue. And this year, we only had the commercial fishery data update because that's what the center had available. But in these other years, they'll also be able to provide a summary of the sort of interim survey data and survey information. So it won't be a full-blown stock assessment, but that's something that the SSC had requested if available. So I expect we'll have just a little bit more information available when we take it to the SSC in those interim years.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, does anyone have any questions for Jessica at this time? Michelle Duval, go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jessica, just circling back to one thing that you mentioned in your presentation about industry requesting representation on one of the FMATs, and I feel like maybe we chatted about this before, but can you remind me like what the precedent is for that, for industry representation on an FMAT?
So these issues have been raised before, and on that one, I'm going to punt to our executive director, Chris Moore. He's on the line.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Michelle. We don't have industry reps on FMATs. Is the short answer. We have explored the topic many times over the last 10 years that I've been here, probably even before that, when we first started thinking about FMATs. We have I think we have a well-developed process that involves FMATs and it has a distinct group of people. And we also have industry advisors, again, a distinct group of people. Those particular groups interact. Certainly the FMAT meetings are open to the public, including industry reps, and sometimes they participate that way, but they're not formal representatives.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for clearing that up. Any other questions for Jessica or Chris or Paul regarding the presentation today? Okay, seeing none at this time. Jessica, thank you. Paul, thank you for providing the information that you did for the council today. We did take action to suspend the minimum size, and hopefully, is there anything else, Jessica, that we need to take up as far as any other actions today before I cut you loose?
No, that completes our business for today, and we've got 20 minutes to spare.
Yeah, we got a little extra free time. That's perfect.
Thank you.
So Jason, I see Jason on the webinar. Do you need a few minutes to get yourself set up to go? Do you want to take a quick break, and we could take a 5-minute break? Let's do that. Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's come back at 10:15 and we'll kick off the longfin squid and butterfish 2022 specifications review. Jason's going to give us a presentation on that. So let's take 5 minutes, come back in at 10:15, and we'll start that up. Thanks, everybody.